In this video, we need to talk about bootstrapping, pre-seed, and seed if you are trying to raise funding in 2025. Welcome to Founder Fridays. This is when I reflect upon my week and how I've been working with founders, and I come up with some ideas or a transparent look. I try and give you an unfiltered view of what is going through my head, especially when it comes to fundraising. So in this video, I'm going to share with you something that's been on my mind this week because I've been working with founders that have been working super hard on raising funding. And we're talking about pre-seed all the way to tens of millions of dollars because that's what I do. Before we continue, let me do an introduction. And if you've met me before, you're already part of this channel, thank you so much. Use the timestamps and skip ahead. I'm going to make it easy for you. If we haven't met before, my name is Ed Kang, 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. And that's just a fancy way of saying I failed a bunch of times to your benefit because I use this YouTube channel and videos like this to help founders avoid some of the catastrophic mistakes that I've made in my career, especially if you're raising early stage funding. It's not to say you're not going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try to make your life a little bit easier because it's hard enough as it is. I'm also the Chief Strategy Officer for Startups.com, where I advise over 600 founders and we have 4,000 startups as part of our alumni network. If you haven't checked this out yet, feel free to. A lot of free resources. And while you're here, I'd appreciate a like, comment, and subscribe. Your thoughts are always welcome. It's extremely helpful. Let me introduce you to a concept that I just discovered called seed strapping. And I've been a founder for over 25 years, and this is the first time I've heard this term. Now, you might have heard this term before, but let me tell you, I was blown away at some of the conversation that was happening around this concept, and I want to introduce it to you if you haven't heard about it before, and we need to discuss what seed strapping is and why I think it'll be the secret in 2025, and I plan to adopt it moving forward. This means I'm looking to work with founders through Startups.com and through my other channels like my Angel Investor Syndicate that are interested in seed strapping because I think it presents extreme advantages to a lot of founders out there, and it covers off some of the issues that we experience with other stages of fundraising. Let's explore those just for a moment. First, we have bootstrapping. I'm a huge fan of bootstrapping. I do that with every single startup right now. Bootstrapping is when you use your own funds or you generate your own revenue, and you don't rely on external investment, especially institutional capital, because as soon as you get them in, you've hired your own boss. And I like control. I like being able to control my own destiny, to be able to make my own decisions. Autonomy is extremely important to me. And a lot of founders, when you bring on an investor, don't realize all the checks and balances and all the hooks, all the conditions that come with it, especially with operating agreements, pro rata rights, drag on rights, you name it, liquidation rights. It's crazy. So bootstrapping is the ideal way. And in fact, most founders bootstrap. Most businesses bootstrap right in the beginning. The problem occurs that if you want growth, let's say you're in a hyper-competitive market or you're doing something super cool and innovative, and if you don't have the gasoline to pour on the fire, then it becomes very difficult because sometimes we acknowledge that you need funds to grow faster. You want to prioritize growth while you're generating revenue, and waiting for that revenue to come in, especially profitability, doesn't always make sense. And I get it. So bootstrapping only gets you so far. So what do founders do next? Well, they go for pre-seed. Pre-seed is the wild, wild west of funding. That's when you typically go to friends, family, and associates or very generous angel investors and say, we haven't quite figured it out yet. We're getting signs of product market fit. We probably have problem solution fit, and we need capital to get out there and validate or invalidate our assumptions. Pre-seed is super tough because the goalpost move and every investor is different, especially after what we've gone through from 2021, which were the glory days. Those were some fun times. Funding was happening in 30 days. It was crazy what I was seeing out in the marketplace. But then the bottom fell out and we've been going through nuclear winter. Funding has really dried up. Interest rates went up. There was inflation. And what happened was pre-seed really got squeezed from an institutional standpoint. Because you have to think about it here. If you're an investor and you're watching investors get access to all these other deals at the seed stage when the metrics are there, it's proven product market fit. Well, what do? You end up moving down into the pre-seed. So you have to allocate your money at earlier stages. And that's what happened to 2021. And if you're a founder and you're thinking, wow, all these companies at pre-seed were getting major valuations and major checks, that's because the market demand was there. The supply of capital was there. There was demand for high quality startups. And if startups showed signs of getting to product market fit, Well, what you did is you took earlier chances. You probably got a better valuation for your money as an investor, and you own more of the company. And that's where institutions like Y Combinator, A16Z, you've got all these companies that went more into pre-seed, and they really made their mark. The failure rates are much higher, but the rewards are there. And so founders went out there and said, oh, pre-seed grows on trees. It's so much easier. And then there was a rude awakening starting in 2022. It got super bad up until 2024. And I think things are going to get a little bit easier starting from 2025 on. It's all a cycle. Everything moves in cycles. So you're going to see the market get frothy again. But pre-seed is super tough because founders don't really understand what are the metrics to qualify for pre-seed, because there are none. You can find an investor that just is going to invest on a napkin or based upon your domain expertise, what your team has accomplished. Other investors need to see revenue. I saw a stat that said 48% of investors want to see revenue in their pre-seed investments. Some of them needed $1 million of revenue or more. How is a founder supposed to do that if they don't have the capital to get going? And that's the reason pre-seed exists, and it will always exist. The checks have stayed steady, especially for raising under $1 million. So now let's talk about seed, because seed is the next step from pre-seed, and that's where you need legitimate traction, product market fit. And so startups have a very difficult time jumping right to seed, but if you can, while it's better for you because you get a better valuation and you get access to a lot of other investors who are seriously interested, because seed is where the magic starts to happen. The FOMO starts to set in. The problem is seed investors are a lot tougher. They're a lot more stringent, especially when you're getting ready for them to sell you up to the A, B, C, D, E, F rounds before you go public. Because when a seed investor comes in, they want you to have an exit strategy. You need to be able to get to unicorn status, and not all startups are built for that. If you don't have revenue that's doubling every year, or 10% week over week, 40% month over month, seed investors won't be interested in you. Therefore, if you're trying to build a company that's going to make, let's say, $10 million, that's not going to cut it for seed investors. They need to see you get to $100 million. Why? Because they want to sell you up to the A, B, C, D rounds. They're probably raising a fund. They need to raise more funds to get those almighty management fees, and that's how they make a living, by getting you to the next round of funding. But what if you as a founder, you don't want to get to ABC rounds? You don't want to go public. You don't want to do the dog and pony shows and go through all the compliance to get there. Some of you, you need to get there because you're working on that type of startup. You're built to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to get to unicorn status. Startups will raise $200, $300, $400 million to get to unicorn status and above, and that is a grind. Not a grind that I enjoyed, I've gotten out of it, and not a grind that I see startups that I work with at startups.com, Fundable, when I'm helping them raise funds. It is not an enjoyable journey. It's insufferable and thankless on so many levels. In fact, once you raise seed money, you as a CEO, you're in permanent fundraising mode. Your first job as a CEO is don't run out of money, and your second job is don't run out of money. And the third is oversee the company. Up until that point in time, as a CEO, as the core founder, your job was vision, bringing on the team, talking to customers, working on the product. But after you raise that seed, it becomes a different lifestyle, a different grind altogether. And some founders, like I said, are built for it. Others, like me, are not. So let's get back to this concept called seed strapping. And I read all the definitions, and I went out there and I said, okay, what is it? How are people talking about it? And how can we adapt it for us here in this community? And let me show you the definition that I've come up with. Seed strapping is when you start with bootstrapping, and raising friends, family, and associate rounds are okay because it's not institutional capital. You just have to do it right, until you have enough traction metrics to raise a seed round and never raise again. Look at this definition one more time. Seed strapping. Bootstrapping, if you need to raise FFA, all right, until you have enough traction metrics to raise a seed round and never raise again. And I'm not the only one who's been thinking about this. I have heard other investors say to founders, how much money do you need to never raise money again? And it's right at the seed stage. Now, the founder, you have to go out and be scrappy, raising an FFA round if you need to get to the point where you can get traction metrics. So I'll always be helping you raise FFA rounds. I want you to think about seed strapping. What is the amount I need to raise so I never have to raise money again? As I've looked out there for case studies of this, I've seen founders raise $750,000 and get to $500 million in revenue. That's an extreme case. But what if you could raise $750,000 or $500,000, right under $1 million, and get to $10 million in revenue? That's going to be okay for investors because at that moment in time, you could probably exit your company to private equity, sell it for maybe 5x, $50 million. But you don't have so many investors that have diluted you down to the point where you have such a small amount that it's not worth it for you to exit at $50 million. On top of which, you don't have VC or institutional capital that have basically strapped you down, saddled you with liquidation rights, follow-on rights, all those preferences, those terms that they put in to say maybe you can't exit for that $50 million because they're not going to make enough money. You need to get to $100 million, and sometimes it's worth it to them to shut your company down rather than continue to work with you and try and get you to the point where you can get there. What happens if your TAM totally tops out and you're just not going to get to unicorn status? Well, you don't have as many options. Sometimes investors will force you to take more capital or do a down round, which is not fun for anybody. And your initial investors, especially your pre-seed, are getting batted around because you have to go where the big money says you must go. And I'm being very generalist and reductive, and I'm bringing up a lot of points that many of you don't understand, don't experience, and that's the danger. A lot of founders don't understand how the venture capital game works. But now back to imagining that you raised $500,000, $750,000, and you got to $10 million, then you sold for 50. You could give a very healthy return for those seed investors and then keep the rest for yourself. And I personally think that is much more attainable for the majority of the founders out there. Less than 10% of companies, startups will succeed, but less than a percentage, 1 to 3% of those companies are going to get VC funding and get to unicorn status. For every unicorn that you see out there, there are literally hundreds of startups, funded startups that are going to wipe out billions of dollars of investments because they are going to fail. It is a zero-sum game. It's like Game of Thrones. I've been rewatching it these days. In the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. No middle ground. So why not consider seed strapping? Getting back to our definition, here's what you need to do. You need to bootstrap, be scrappy in the beginning. If you need to raise a little bit of funding, raise some of that funding, but raise just enough to get to the point where you're getting traction and you're getting metrics. Focus on distribution. Focus on revenue. And then you can decide, hey, can we raise a seed round because those investors are going to be a lot more serious. But you tell the investors you have a plan, this is how much money you need, and if everything works out, you're never going to have to raise money again, and everybody's going to get a healthy return. Sure, some investors are not going to want to play ball like Y Combinator, like A16Z, Sequoia, and that's all right because the fraction, the small percent of founders that actually get into those accelerators or those early stage funding rounds is going to be so infinitesimal, you're going to increase your chances by taking a look at seed strapping. And that's what I want all of you to consider because if you're part of this channel, I believe everybody should do a startup at least once. And I believe startups are the new entrepreneurship. And that's why we're here. What's next? I want you to watch some of these other videos that I put on the screen. Hopefully this has been helpful and giving you some new ideas. And I'd love to hear your feedback. Let me know what you're thinking. And if the seed strapping idea was completely new or you've known it all along and you're doing it, I'd love to hear from you. If it is completely new, tell me what you think and what you need. And let's continue on this series of Founder Fridays where I share right from the heart and we can grow together, be successful together. Thanks for hanging out in this video. I'll see you in the next one.